the Harkonnens looking the way they do in this series is largely meant to show what becomes of them by 10,000 years later after they get the spice control of Arrakis and all these years of incest and brutality and violence, and really meant to be the very thing that the Bene Gesserit were supposed to be putting a check on. But there's a reason why the Harkonnens are allowed to flourish. It's just you have to kind of look at it more largely and philosophically. It doesn't just kind of come to you in that in the narrative. Like, you have to kind of really ask if that's their mission, and why can a family like the Harkonnens have as much power as they do by the time of Paul's story.
Welcome again to another Blerdlines podcast. I am your host, Kam, also known as the Camarillion. And next to me, I got...
You were hearing Professor Magneto give his cold open on Dune Prophecy.
And to my other side, I have...
It is the yellow-hatted banana head known as Josh.
And we thank the viewers for popping in and dropping in on us for another little talk, but we're just trying to get into the recent HBO show called Dune Prophecy, and we're just bringing it down. And Professor D, you were getting into kind of like, we kind of started off offline about timing of when this happened, and we discussed, this is 10,000 years, approximately 10,000 years before the birth of Paul Atreides and the famous Frank Herbert trilogy, so to speak. But we are unclear, which we can look up, about how far it is from the War Against the Machine, how far out. But it's pretty recent based on episode 1, because the characters still have a fear of the machines when they appear.
Yeah. And it's notable because as by the time you get to Paul's era, that fear has all but diminished, right? It's almost like thinking machines are in their consciousness in the same way that I don't know what to compare it to without being offensive, so I won't go there. But it's one of those things that now at that time during Paul's era, they only remember that there was a Butlerian jihad. And the reason it's significant is because Paul's movement is sort of looked at in the comparison to how it changes everything, in the same way that the Butlerian jihad that they are referencing in Dune Prophecy changed where they are currently. Now they're no longer they use the words anti-technology. I think that's kind of a misnomer. They have a certain type of technology and it's clearly advanced, but it's not autonomous, if that makes any sense. It doesn't have any ability to process and think on its own, which is where those, the mentats come into play, because now it's more about, and again, this is where the philosophy comes in with Herbert, is the whole idea of the mentat is humanity learning to adapt to be able to think in that way, to unlock chambers of our brain that allows us to think in the same speed and manner of a machine. In that process and obviously they only have a small segment of the population that were kind of over time had that evolution forced upon them.
I was going to reiterate that with Herbert's vision, it's also reiterated in Dune Prophecy, where they make mention of exploiting the human mind to its full capacity. By the time we start reading Dune, we have the components and characters that have reached that tier where Herbert wanted to explain that, where you have mentats, we're basically supercomputers. That is the evolution and the final transition into what they are capable of doing without leaning on the machines as a crutch or AI source, where the humans are the AI and they can gather all that information, but there's machines in this world because they use it to get up spice, they use it to get around. A spaceship with a computer is essentially a machine, so it's not totally void of machines, but there is a cap, a finite level that they use the machines on that level. Whereas in Dune Prophecy, I don't have a sense of that yet. They're afraid of it. I don't know if they totally strayed away from it completely, because in evidence in episode 1, a machine pops up. So there's evidence where people are still kind of like, yeah, machines are, we beat them. We can deal with it. We can have a toy. No big deal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. There's still, there has emerged a culture, and you see that in the first episode with the, what was their name? House Jared or something like that. Some weird, odd name that don't sound really sci-fi, but that's kind of classic Dune. You have the ones that sound sci-fi, and then the ones is like, okay. I think Herbert was it. That's one of those things where the author's like playing
Paul Atreides.
Yeah, exactly. Very much this, and that is a great example because it hits on both. Paul is a very regular run of the mill name, but Atreides is like, you don't hear anybody's name Atreides around here other than Dune, right? Just like Skywalker. There are no Skywalkers. There were no Skywalkers before Star Wars, more showing how Dune influenced that particular story. But yeah, no, they are at a stage where they're still not entirely removing themselves from artificial intelligence. And when you think about it, we're talking about AI now in the way that it is, but we've had artificial intelligent machines for a very long time in terms of what they can do and what we can tell them to do for us. But in this society, they're more so, like you said, and this is where, again, Herbert's philosophical aspect comes in, where he's like, no, we're only going to use the industrial machines that help us mine spice, help us travel to stars, help us, light or aggregation, the things that we can't physically do. We can, but it would take much more time and much more manpower. For those things that we have to think and process, we will use that organic machine that sits in our head, right? And we'll push it until we find a generation that is actually born directly with that ability tapped in. And so that's where the society now in Dune Prophecy is struggling with, where you have the sisterhood who are already doubled down on that track. Valia, Josh and I talked about this. Valia's use of the voice was a little bit, okay, we need more for that, because that's a very powerful ability that they develop.
Okay, so I have questions on that. Apparently we're getting the origin story of the sisterhood and the Bene Gesserit. But the thing is, I would want them, I don't know, maybe this is just me. Like, how did she do that? How did she acquire that? How did that come to be?
Well, that's what he was saying. They didn't flesh that out at all. They just something that she'd been working on in the background secretly.
Yeah. And I'm like, no, see, that doesn't work. Now,
yeah. That's the one flaw of that pilot.
Yeah. I was like, no, that's exposition that doesn't work. We need to see that. We need to understand what led to something of that nature being done. And is this the first generation or is this the second generation? I would think that if it's the first generation, after she did that, she might have a nosebleed or a seizure or something like that, because she's pushing her brain to a place where it hasn't been.
Right. And that's sort of an extension of the overall plan of the Bene Gesserits. They want to, the whole point of creating the Kwisatz Haderach is to be able to create that next level being, to basically fulfill everything that Dee was just talking about. That's their whole, so you're talking how many generations back, that was the plan, that was Sister Raquel's plan, Mother Raquel's plan, and that's like Valia's obsession to be able to push that forward, to push that plan forward.
Yeah, and then what they call, Jessica describes it in Dune as bridging. They have been working. They're working to create a mind that can bridge space and time. And we had the sort of reference or the foreshadowing. I don't like to call it foreshadowing because we already know what's coming, but we do have the reference of it backfiring and it giving rise to a tyrant who punishes them for it. Now, most people would assume that they're talking about Paul, but they're not. And those eyes that we see in the stars, those aren't Paul's eyes.
No.
Those are not Paul's eyes. But, without,
I'm assuming that's a character that I have yet read the book to yet.
I will just say that what they're referring to in those eyes belong to the God Emperor of Dune, the future God Emperor of Dune.
Yeah.
Paul's son. And that's all I will say. But, I like that as a reader because to me, it's like, okay, it would be easy for them to allude to Paul because Paul is the focus of Denis Villeneuve's, 2-part, epic. But we know that he's doing Messiah. I don't think he intends to do Children or Emperor or God Emperor, but for these writers to foreshadow, forecast the God Emperor of Dune, I think it just told me that they're kind of reaching for something a little bit more ambitious that will make this stand out in its own.
Agreed.
Yeah, the one thing I noted, again, we had this conversation offline about, is this world, this Dune Prophecy, connected to Denis' world? And it is, because I got that sense of the backdrops, the design, the world building, and how everything looked and felt. I was like, oh, this feels like an extension from the movie. However, there was one glaring thing. We talked about the look of the Harkonnens. They look more human. And so I was like, is this connected? Now, if it is connected, I want to know what happened. And I don't know if we'll ever get there from here in between these 10,000 years of what their current appearance looks like and how they became to look, how they look when we get to Dune, the movie by Denis. Something happened. Also, another thing is I'm interested in how they misread the prophecy and how that collapsed. That's just my little own nuanced thing of like, they thought it was something. They had this idea of trying to get, where did it go wrong? Where did they mislead? I also want to know how Valia did do the voice. Yeah, Valia did do the voice. I'm very interested because that is a powerful tool. And I'm interested in this character, Desmond Hart. Why is he resistant to the voice? I've never seen that before. And I don't know if there's anything in history that shows a character that is resistant to the voice, and how did he become resistant to the voice?
They touch on the fact that he was transformed in some way by Shai Hulud, the desert worms. So it stands to reason if because the worms are so revered in that world, and they're kind of like all powerful beings. So it stands to reason if he was altered with an encounter or an injury or whatever it was that happened to him when he encountered one of the worms, that I believe that they're alluding to that being the explanation as to why he's able to resist the voice.
So worm mysticism,
basically.
And also, I mean, I haven't seen that part, but also I think it could be, and I'm just thinking if I'm writing this and I've already thrown out the voice and then I write this scene, the idea is that maybe she hasn't developed the voice as well as she thought she did. And that it's much like with the Jedi mind trick, not working on certain individuals of a certain intellect or, will, that this has yet to be something that can break all wills when spoken. And I just say that because we do have proof of it not working. And that's, when Paul tried to do it and he wasn't efficient in it yet. Remember,
Right.
Jessica,
Voice directly. Yeah.
yeah, Jessica chastised him every time. Your pitch is incorrect and all of this stuff. So it could have been that. Maybe she just hasn't developed it as foolproof as it is by the time we get to Paul's turn.
I will say this. That is a fair point. You may be correct in that assessment. However, at this time when her voice fails, she's had 30 years to perfect it.
Yeah, she was much older.
And that is a good point.
Yeah.
And that's why I said the whole right now, the way that they've set up the voice is problematic because it's such a huge part of the Bene Gesserit weapon of their arsenal and their power that for her to just kind of as an acolyte develop this thing on her own. I'm not saying it won't happen, it can't happen, or fictional writing or storytelling hasn't seen protagonists do that. But I just need more. Show it to me. You know, where did this come? This isn't something that you can just unlock without consequences. And even in Herbert's world, his more grounded depiction of his science, it's known that.
Yeah, the narration that happens that takes place when she uses the voice, it's not nearly sufficient. It's the one glaring problem I have with the pilot. It's just, something she'd been working. Literally, they describe it as something that she'd been teaching herself in the background.
Yeah,
just like that's a BS. Like that's not enough for something that's going to be as detailed as this appears to be. To just sort of there were a couple of things they washed over because it was like, it was the
poison.
The poison I think makes sense because we only know how the poison comes about, but just how the Bene Gesserit was formed in the beginning to be just at the start of the start of the episode, they're basically just like, yeah, so, she was cast out after, her family was cast out after the Great Machine War and she struck out on her own and witches.
So, but
how they explain it, and it's not enough.
Yeah, they basically did a Lord of the Rings washover of the Machine War and how the sisterhood came to form. But there was one thing I wanted to mention about the poison. Usually when the anybody that becomes a Reverend Mother that takes the poison to open up their mind, it's in the company of a lot of experts. And when Valia was about to take it and she didn't, she was in the company of the current Reverend Mother and the daughter, I think that was her daughter, of the Reverend Mother to take it. She left. All of a sudden, the Reverend Mother gives her the poison because she has this other mission she has to accomplish back in her homeland regarding some beef with the Atreides clan. And then after a certain time, she just takes it by herself with nobody watching her. I'm like, yo, most of the time I've seen people take this poison is with like in a group setting. It's like taking shrooms by yourself. So you don't know what's going to happen, right? You take some type of drug, you want to be with people that know what they're doing so they can walk you through it. She just pops it in by herself. I'm like, she could have died, right? And we would have never known, right? But neither here nor there. Now that I know you can do it by yourself and potentially come out of it by yourself, cool. Okay, I'm game.
Well, that's the water of life is how the Fremen Reverend Mothers unlock their mind.
Right.
I'm not entirely sure how or remember how Herbert explains it as far as how the normal or the Imperium Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother unlocks their sight. I'm not sure that was ever made clear.
Okay, sorry. I was gonna say I say this only reading Dune only, and finally getting into the Dune Prophecy with 3 episodes. So there could be evidence of that out there, but I've yet to encounter it. So,
well, that's what I'm saying. The only scene that we have ever seen that, and I don't know what you're referring to because I haven't seen those episodes yet, but the only scene that is in the book and in the subsequent movies in which a Bene Gesserit becomes a Reverend Mother is we only see the Fremen process, and that's my point. I don't know how the Imperium Bene Gesserit unlock their sight for the Reverend Mothers. I think it's implied that it's over a lifetime of training.
Right. And so that brings me to another issue that I had. When Rakella passes away, at least they intimate previously that anytime a Reverend Mother passes away, it's not before passing on all of her knowledge to the next Reverend Mother.
That's what it is. Yeah.
So when Rakella passes away, none of that happens. She doesn't pass it on to Donatea. She doesn't pass it on to Valia. And I'm just like, that they don't explain any of that. And again, like D and I always say, one line of dialogue could have explained it all away. It's like, that there isn't nearly enough. You could easily say there isn't, in times in later on in the future, Reverend Mothers pass on all their, the collected knowledge of all the Reverend Mothers before her, Rakella being the first. It's really just the one person. So there's no lifetime of knowledge outside of her own to pass along, but it's still one person. It's still her lifetime of knowledge. She could have, there, like I said, there were little things that popped up in that pilot were just like, I'm gonna let it slide because the rest of this is dope, but it jumps out a little bit.
I think it speaks to how complex his work is. I mean, Dune is not a simple piece of written literature. It's philosophical, it's scientific, it has a lot of layers that he expresses through these narrative actions, right? So, the process of passing knowledge from generation to generation, because remember, in Dune, you eventually learn that through Paul, that the entire lineage is connected even to us. Because Paul sees individuals like Hitler and he sees our time and what we were. So that's when Herbert first reveals in the story that yes, these characters, these humans are connected to us. They descended from us, and somehow made their way to the stars and put some distance between themselves and Earth and all of that stuff. But that philosophical aspect of it is why when you do have Dune Prophecy kind of glossing over certain things, or having Valia just say she was developing the voice in between her classes, it doesn't work for a Herbert narrative. These are the things in terms of adapting from page to screen that shouldn't be lost. It doesn't matter if you change certain things because you have to based on the differences in medium, but you should try to maintain the essence, the point of why the work exists in the first place. And I think that is something that a lot of these interpreters and adapters miss when they make these live action pieces.
Not gonna lie, I thought we were gonna get into her history of using the voice through a traumatic experience with her flashbacks, and I think it was I don't know if it's episode 2 or episode 3. I think more so 2, where they really go back. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is the feeling I got because this is a trope that I'm used to. Here's a flashback. We're gonna see how she became who she is 30 years from now with these few scenes, right? And we didn't get that. It was one of those things, like Josh has said. There are a few things that stand out, but they don't bug me to the point where I'm like upset. It's just kind of like we've known each other. We're like mind, speaking to the individuals in this chat, and we understand how movies are made and what's expected, and to understand a good story and good narrative and whatnot. So we can differentiate really bad writing, bad storytelling from stuff that's like, okay, this is a problem, but not enough for us to be like, I'm not going to tap in anymore. I'm not going to watch. And I think Dune Prophecy, as of the 3 episodes, falls into the latter where they've got some issues and there needs to be explained. Dune is a world that I think there needs to be exposition, especially if you're pulling from source material that really it's there, but it's like kind of a historical representation of this thing where we need to understand how things work. You just can't be like assuming, oh, because of this, this is going to happen, right?
You just set beginning, middle, and end point.
Yeah, I do agree.
What a lot of adaptations take from, similar to Rings of Power. It's not, they're drawing from multiple things and piecing together a new greater scope narrative that exists within the sandbox. So, there are flaws in it. It's not unwatchable, I don't think. I think the question will always come down to execution. Denis Villeneuve was able to do what he did with Dune because the medium cinema allowed for it. And he had a very grounded and tight way of telling that story. And that allowed his visual, all those other things to really stand out and run out in front, in addition to the philosophical nature and aspects of Herbert's world. And it cut across all of the various elements that make cinema, right? So you felt it in the score from Hans Zimmer. You felt it in the editing. You felt it in the cinematography, the set pieces, the quiet moments in the scenes. Even the things that we don't quite see that are literally brought from the book into the screen, such as, the Baron's weird obsession with Fade Rotha in the book. It doesn't make it into Denis Villeneuve's film, but we do see that the Baron still has a very unhealthy relationship with his heir, right? He sets him up where he almost gets killed in the arena by the Atreides. And so, knowing how to show that these things is, I think, the challenge, and that Denis V showed that he understood it, right? The Harkonnens are described as brutal, violent, unattractive human beings. So he makes them not only appear that way in manner, but physically appear that way. Like the Baron is a repulsive individual, so repulsive that he can't even stand up on his own. So like he's weighed down by that greed and wealth and power that he's accumulated. So I think, Dune Prophecy has a long way to go before it gets to where the films have left them. And to be honest, they got some big shoes to follow, and that's part of the reason why I think early on they're getting hit with such heavy criticism in terms of the pacing and things like that. And even the stuff that Josh and I and you Kam as well have pointed out as just kind of being a little bit lazy in its effort. Again, I can't get past Valia's use of the voice in such a laissez-faire manner, and then to say, oh, I've just been developing this, and then she doesn't like pass out, or not even that, but she successfully does it, and there's no resistance from the other Bene Gesserit sister. Again, if this is the first time you've tried that on somebody who's literally against you right now, I would think she would struggle enough to where she might be able to loosen that grip.
And at least as trained as she is. Oh, in all the other arts of the Bene Gesserit.
Exactly. Which they imply that they had already began to train. The voice was just one aspect of it. So she couldn't resist you on this new technique that you just tried the first time, and she's a master. That'd be like if, it'd almost be as ridiculous as some force sensitive kid assassinating a Jedi master. Oh, I don't know if we saw that horror.
Ooh, oh, that was uncalled for.
Related to even Neo, who had just learned Kung Fu, couldn't beat Morpheus, who had already learned Kung Fu, because technically, skillfully, they're on the same skill level, but now it's a knowledge-based thing.
It's an experience thing. Can't make that up. You can't artificially implant that. That was the point of those things. right? And we see it again when Neo gets his ass whooped by Agent Smith, on that subway station. You might have that knowledge up there, but without the wisdom and the experience of using it, it doesn't mean much.
Agreed.
Facts. And like I said, end of the day, I don't have a problem with the pacing. There's not a lot of action going on in Dune from the book Dune, right? There's action, but it's not like that. So it's more,
it's purposeful action. It's built up to it and paid off.
Yeah. So this reminds me of early Game of Thrones. A lot of dialogue, a lot of character world building, a lot of intrigue. It's kind of like a science fiction soap opera, a good one, where we tap in, we intrigue, we want to know what happens next. If you're familiar with Dune in some aspects, you're like, okay, how do we get here? And so with this prequel, I'm just kind of like, okay, how does the Bene Gesserit get to where they be the Bene Gesserit, the ninja nuns that I call them, and the training? Because, like, again, Dune, after reading Dune and then watching Dune and then seeing the Bene Gesserit, no movie has done the Bene Gesserit any justice of what they're actually capable of at their apex, in my opinion, based off how I read and interpret the Bene Gesserit. They are very powerful manipulators behind the scene, and they can fight. So
yeah, I was gonna say they again. I said before, George Lucas ain't we see where you got your stuff from, George. Like we love you still, but we see where you got it from. But yeah, the Bene Gesserit are as powerful as they are essentially the Jedi and the Sith, right? They are both at the same time because their intent is to control in the shadows like the Sith. But they're also very public and a part of the Imperium in terms of its politics, and people know, but they don't know, right? Similar to, the Sith during the age of the Empire. Some people knew that the Emperor was a Sith Lord and Darth Vader was a Sith Lord, but then most don't know. And the ones that don't know have a louder voice than the ones that do know and are more apt to be listened to. So that's the same thing with the Bene Gesserit. They're not evil, but they're not good either in terms of how you view good. They are very much Machiavellian in that, in the most extreme sense of that idea. In their mind, this ends will justify the means. We'll get the Kwisatz Haderach, but we'll murder a bunch of people. We'll destroy entire houses and families. We'll harass the Emperor from the shadows, like until we get the Kwisatz Haderach. And that was their mission.
Yeah, what I took from this is like the people of Dune or in that world all have an agenda. Like there's no pure people. Even the Fremen who have in the movie Dune by the recent adaptation is that even the Fremen have their own agenda. Even though they look like victims throughout they have an agenda. They want their profit so they can push forward their own agenda. Everybody has no, they're not.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you get to Dune Messiah, you really know that the Fremen aren't victims. Like that when Paul, you find out why Paul was afraid when he saw that vision and why he didn't want to go south. You don't get the scope of that until you read Dune Messiah, and you find out. And it's 12 years later. Paul is the emperor, and you find out what that holy jihad did to the universe, what the Fremen did to the universe. When it says burn across the known universe, they did. They faithfully spread the word of Muad'Dib, and they did it with glee to his death. Stilgar, even when Paul told him that it was all so that he could get where he needed to get, that it was all of it, Stilgar still believed in Paul. So much so that he is I can't tell you this because you got to get to that one in the reading, because it's a good moment. What Stilgar does for a certain character who was a thorn in Paul's side, from the very beginning, who actually is the reason why is technically the overarching antagonist of Paul's story.
Mm-hmm. I'll get there soon. Give me a couple months. I got a couple books to get.
Oh yeah, I ain't gonna say nothing because when you get to that point, we'll have this. It's amazing in Dune Messiah. Like, so you love him in the first Dune book. He is great as Paul's like top advisor of the Imperium. Like he is amazing. The one thing about going from Children of Dune to Dune Messiah is the fact that, and then Emperor Dune Messiah, the Children of Dune, and then Emperor Dune, is that the time jumps takes away so many characters that you love. And Stilgar is one of those characters that is taken away because obviously he can't live for 1,000 years.
I was about to spoil somebody who's actually there throughout all of this. I don't want to give it away for.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, but he'll learn soon enough.
Yeah.
Because that guy just wouldn't go away.
Will not let him die.
I was gonna say, no, it ain't that he wouldn't go away. Is that individuals refuse to let him die.
Yes. But yeah, it's overall, the show seems to be on the mostly right track in the broader strokes. Even though they're flubbed, and really the only major flubs that I've seen so far were in the pilot. The second episode, as much as I said I wasn't going to watch it because it's going to muddy up something else, something I'm working on. I just couldn't look away. So I watched the second episode. I'm probably going to watch this week's episode, but
yeah, yeah,
it seems like in the broad strokes, they know what they're doing. So far, the only major flubs came in the pilot. Everything else seems to be on point. And I like where it's going. I like how they're going about the overall telling of the story. I'm cool with it so far.
I agree. And also I have to make note that you will notice that the stuff that we talked about has nothing to do with the form of the actual show, of what they're doing, not the acting, not the writing. These are all things that we only know because we've read Herbert's work. So removing that, totally fine. I think it'll be a solid first season if they can stick this whatever they're building to, if they can stick it to that. Because again, some aspects and elements that I think they chose to move past, they should have slowed down. Because if you're telling us this is 100 years after a great war against artificial machines who had you enslaved, and now we have great houses of great wealth, and the sisterhood are advisors to the Imperium or to the Emperor. How did that happen? How did they begin to be inserted into all of why did the Landsgrad trust them? Given that they even seem visually shady. So why did this trust, in such a monumental trust, where did that begin? And I'm not going to say that they have missed the opportunity to tell us that or show us that, because obviously that's how flashbacks can work and things like that. But we need to see that, because I think those are the aspects in TV storytelling that are more interesting than these. You guys know that power that they had, the voice? Here it is. Like that is the type of storytelling that's what I felt when she did that, is that it was less, okay, we're thinking carefully how to build to this, and we're just going to throw it out there because people will recognize it.
That is definitely how that felt. But it seems like based on the second episode, moving forward, it seems like they're shying away from more of that kind of just glossed over storytelling, because they're definitely getting into a lot more detail in terms of things that happen. Just they're rapidly moving through things, but it doesn't feel rushed so far. Past the elements that we talked about in the pilot. In terms of, the Bene Gesserit sort of, I wouldn't say waning influence, but, they reach the top by episode 2, having Bene Gesserit be trusted advisors, all the way up to the Emperor. And that becomes a little shaky by the time you get to the end of the second episode. And so, I like that it's not just, oh, we have this grand plan and, we're going to set it into motion and it's just going to seamlessly move forward. They're clearly throwing a bunch of monkey wrenches into the works. And that is definitely making for, some interesting storytelling, despite the fact that the Bene Gesserit are as backbiting and duplicitous and plans with them and the mistresses of having plans with them plans.
So there's one element that I noticed, and I don't know, you guys that are more versed in the few novels can correct me on, but the way the Bene Gesserit was communicating with each other through sign language, was that evident in the book Dune? How they were talking without talking?
I don't remember if they had.
I don't remember that
system. I think that was something that I think that's something that he established because it wasn't in the other adaptations.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm willing to, because again, I am not fully versed on most of Herbert or
that's a good question.
So, but that was something I noticed. I was like, oh, they're using kind of like a sign language to talk to each other. So again, I'm giving it some leeway because we're telling the story of the beginning of the Bene Gesserit, and this could be something that they could be archaic by the time I read Dune or watch the current adaptation of Dune. So
they're still doing well, and you see it in his film that they still do it. So it's clearly, I think the way Herbert described something like that was just that they did have their own language that they could talk to each other right in front of people without anyone knowing what they were saying. And I think that was sort of the how he described it.
Okay.
But he didn't say anything in particular like, oh, they were using hand signals. At least I would have to read the appendixes. It could be something in there that they pull because there's a lot of detail in those histories and in those appendices.
Fair. Overall, I think it's a solid show. It is a bit slow, but it's not bad slow. Like, I get what they're trying to do. I have no issues with it. I'm looking forward to future episodes. And for me, there is a little bit biased because I am still fresh to Dune. And so I'm excited about Dune and how people are going to tell these adaptations of the story. So that's my take on it. I don't take issue with it because, again, I'm not crazy about Dune, but I like Dune.
I would say that the only thing that stood out in terms of the writing is that none of the characters are that interesting to me. They're very all just kind of cutouts of characters rather than something very interesting that you might be interested in following. And there's a lot of archetypes that they're using, the bastard son, and again, I keep thinking to myself, everybody keeps falling into the Game of Thrones tropes where they keep trying to create these types that were established in that. Even the little kid was giving off Joffrey vibes before he, what happens to him. And I was like, oh, here we go again. Like every show has to create its own Joffrey now. Like even Rings of Power has done it with that, with the Numenorian. I don't know if he's Prince, but our Farazan's son. Like
yeah.
It's that sort. It was until the end of the episode. I was like, oh, here we go again.
I will say this though. I'm interested on the hierarchy of what the Atreides clan is, because they seem real lower tier currently in this Dune Prophecy.
Which will be inaccurate. They were still in power. They were pretty much in power from all of that time in terms of influence, but they didn't have the kind of influence they had by the time of Leto's era. They were pretty much all the lands grab would go whichever way they went. One of the things I could forecast is the creation of the soda car, because you can see where it's going to be a need for House Corono to have the formidable army or soldiers because of the threat that the other houses and the Bene Gesserit represent. So that was something that I took note of when they were talking about when Balia and her sister were talking about undermining the emperor. I was like, oh, okay, now I can see why Seleucus Secundus starts converting and creating the Sodacar as the royal fist.
Well, yeah, and they're already allude to consolidation of military power with things like the marriage of his daughter to the Pruitt's son, coming with a fleet of ships that he needs in order to secure spice sales and all that. So you already see, one could argue they're already giving you the beginnings of that consolidation of military power.
Yeah, not just even the consolidation of it, but having a military power that is totally the emperor's control and not anybody else's. And
right
to the point where all of the other houses, probably with the exception of House Atreides, because of who they were at the time and the people they had trained in their armies, everybody else feared the Sardaukar, including the Harkonnens. So if they follow those tracks and tell us, okay, how did House Carano double down and consolidate its power? Because remember, House Carano sits on that Padishah throne for 10,000 years. Like nobody challenges them or unseats them until Paul Atreides. And so you have to, I think they have the reason that's in and of itself why you can continue to watch if you're familiar with Dune, because they have so many pathways of going and creating these origin, I wouldn't even say origin stories completely, but in terms of the early days of these things and how they came about. You know, the Sardaukar is interesting, especially when you learn that they're like former prisoners that they convert into like devotees, like literally break them and then remake them. Like that's why they're so strong. And so if they can get us on that path where we get to a Carano emperor, I don't know if it's going to be Mark Strong's character. He seems a little, I don't know, but if we can get to a Carano emperor that's like, you know what? I need an army that is totally to House Carano and nobody else. And it has to be the best in the entire Imperium.
I will say this, which is consistent with the film. Women are playing a pivotal role in the leadership or behind the scenes in Dune Prophecy that I saw in the movie. Because Mark Strong's wife's character, she
played by Jodie May, is very familiar. You know her as being Queen Calanthe in Netflix's The Witcher.
Yep. She's orchestrating, especially by episode 2. She's starting to orchestrate and gain her power back, being a leader behind the scenes, where during this moment of, I guess, peace, she's lost her power. And there was a scene noting that between her and her husband, where they had two different ideas of how their marriage and how their governing bodies work. And now it seems like she's earned her favor back in the hierarchy of trying to orchestrate by making some moves behind the scenes. You'll start to see that when you get past episode 1. Josh, I know you peeped that where she gained her power back, but I like that Dune puts women in major power positions, whether it be in the forefront or in the background.
Yeah, and that was Herbert's thing, was he kind of like really showed where the real power kind of lies in terms of, we look at it, and again, this is a philosophical thing, a part of it that a lot makes you question, okay, and it's not even in the comparing it to the real world, but just the women in that story do have largely influence. You know, it's they who created the Kwisatz Haderach. It's Jessica who manipulates Paul to go south. That's why I said, like, to me, the best depiction of Jessica so far has been Denis Villeneuve, because I was like, you know, by that point in the novel, Jessica was a scary individual, and that after she becomes the Reverend Mother and both her and Alia's sight is unlocked, she's terrifying, man. Like, and you see that in his and Rebecca Ferguson's betrayal. Like, you know, when she used the voice and tell Shani, jerk, you know, like, you know, like, she is serious at that point. Like, she doesn't let anything deter her from, because she know Paul has to decide on his own, so she can't make him, but she used that Bene Gesserit skill to create the circumstances where, yes, he will eventually go south, because he kept saying, I'm following somebody south. And the whole time in the first part, they silhouetted the woman that he's following by, so you think it's Shani. It makes you think, but no, it's his mother.
Now, very, very point about who the real leaders are and how powerful characters. Because I always mention that Jessica, at the end of the day, she's a Bene Gesserit, and she's gone. Once you get into that sect, and I'm starting to find out a little bit more context about when you get into this cult or sect, is that everything, damn your feelings. Jessica had a moment of weakness by defying it, by saying she had a boy and trained it in the ways of the Bene Gesserit. But sorry, they said she had a moment where she stepped out of her ideologies of the sisterhood and went against it. But as soon as that happened, she went right back, following the plan. We got to protect the sisterhood and follow the ideology of that. And she went right back.
Well, I would say that it alternated, because I think that it became about proving something to Helena Mulhane, to Reverend Mother, who is that aforementioned overarching antagonist. Because remember, she admits that it was her who pushed, who was basically instigating the beef between Shaddam and Leto. It was her who suggested to liquidate the Atreides clan, and she did this because Jessica had a boy and not a girl like she was supposed to.
Mm-hmm. And Jessica had her own plans.
Yeah,
like he was like, I'm absolutely serving exactly the purpose that Reverend Mother put me in position to do, but I'm going to do it my way. And as soon as I get to where I need it to be, I'm going to snap back and get back on the plan that Reverend Mother set up, but I'm doing it my way. And so my way of doing that, my way of doing that is her way of doing that was to create proximity to the ultimate power.
Yep.
The gamble was Paul, if I train him, there's a safe bet. There's not a safe bet, but there's a chance that he's exactly who we think he's going to be, being the Kwisatz Haderach. And me having proximity to him and being able to maneuver him to a certain degree gives me more power in a certain respect than the Grand Reverend Mother.
And also, that's the reason why Leto point blank, and that was a foreshadowing, when he says, I need you to promise me that you'll look after Paul. I'm not asking the Bene Gesserit. I am asking his mother, because he knows that they make the distinction. I am his mother in this situation, but I am the Bene Gesserit in this. And we saw that when she let him go in to take the Gam Jabbar test. And she was willing to keep people from going in there, and she was willing to accept if Reverend Mother Mulhane had killed him.
Yeah,
willing to accept that.
That was one of another few times where she had hands off. She's been controlling and shaping him for the better part of his life. And that one moment, she had no power, no control. She had to step back and let the fate take its course. And she was ready to let her son die for the sake of the order. She wasn't a parent then. She was a sister.
And that was her concession, right? That was the concession she had to make for her arrogance. Now, she thought that ended it, that Paul had convinced the Reverend Mother. And in fact, he did. And that was the reason why she doubled down on what she did, because the whole reason that Jessica was safe was because of the Atreides and they consistently over that 10,000 year period exhibited the ideal leadership. And so you take the ideal leader and you began to mold them into the Mentat and then into a Bene Gesserit. You then get the Kwisatz Haderach. And again, at the time, they didn't want the Atreides rising. And if Paul became the Kwisatz Haderach, it was over. And she knew that Shaddam was going to fall at some point very soon. She just couldn't see at whose hand was he going to fall, either the Harkonnens or the Atreides.
Facts.
And therein lay the genius of it. Because there's multiple ways that everything ends up happening.
And that's really the point, right? Like that's that at the end of the day, that's Herbert's point of designing his story that way. Is even Paul says, yes, there's multiple paths we can take. There's only one that's going to get us where we need to be. And that's the jihad. That's the millions of people dying in my name. And that's the Fremen worshiping at the foot of my father's skull. I don't want this to happen. I'm not going to like it, but it's the only way. It's the same thing with Chani. That's why he said, I know she forgives me.
How do you really never around?
Yeah.
Or it is example.
I've already seen it. I've already seen how all of this goes. So at that point, that's why I said I liked, and this is going into the movie, I liked that Chalamet had the sense to change his performance, because at that point, there was no more uncertainty with Paul. He was not unsure about any choice he made because he had seen every possibility that there was. He could literally see him in front of him as he's in his waking life. He could see all these paths playing out. And so all that to say, Dune Prophecy has that to work towards. And so it has to, right now, I think they're on a good path. We'll see if they can sustain that.
I will agree. And on that note, that is our small discussion about the first 3 episodes of Dune Prophecy. We're going to tune in. We're going to come back and potentially have a roundtable at the end of the season and talk about it. Or if there's a significant episode that stands out that we must talk about, we will get back on and chime in, and you guys can tap in. But that has been another Blerdlines episode, and we are out.